It was a torrential downpour in Portland, Oregon, the kind that turns gutters into rivers and drowns out all sound except the relentless drumming on rooftops. Through this deluge, an ambulance from Station 17 wailed, lights slicing through sheets of rain as it raced toward a reported heart attack on Willow Creek Drive. EMT Sarah Donovan gripped the dashboard when her partner Jake slammed the brakes, sending supplies sliding across the back compartment. There, in the middle of Forestry Road, stood a German shepherd soaked to the bone, mud-splattered, but utterly immovable. Its mismatched eyes, one blue, one amber, fixed on the ambulance with unnerving intensity. Jake hit the horn twice. The dog didn't flinch. "Just go around it," Jake said, checking his watch. But when Sarah stepped out into the rain, the dog backed up 3 precise steps, then sat again. It wasn't afraid. It wasn't lost. It was waiting for them. When Sarah approached, the dog rose and trotted toward the forest's edge, stopping to look back at her with an intelligence that sent chills through her rain-soaked uniform. "Jake," she called, "cancel that heart attack call. Something's wrong here." Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. Frank Mitchell hadn't always been a man who talked to dogs. At 72, the retired Portland police detective had earned his silence after 35 years of bearing witness to humanity's worst impulses. His weathered face, mapped with lines that deepened when he smiled, which wasn't often enough these days. According to Eleanor, told the story of a man who'd seen too much but still managed to keep his heart intact. Eleanor Mitchell had been Frank's anchor for 48 years of marriage. At 70, her hands now bore the slight tremor of age, but they remained as capable as when she'd worked as an emergency room nurse. She understood trauma and healing better than most, which is why she'd supported Frank's decision 8 years ago when he'd come home cradling a bloody bundle of fur. "His name is Duke." Frank had announced that rainy night in 2015, his police uniform soaked through, eyes burning with a determination Eleanor hadn't seen since they'd lost their son Michael in Afghanistan 2 years prior. The German shepherd puppy, barely alive after being rescued from an illegal dogfighting operation, had bite marks across his body, a partially severed ear, and eyes of different colors, one ice blue, one amber brown. The veterinarian had suggested euthanasia as the kindest option. Frank refused. "He fought to stay alive this long. We're not giving up on him now." For 3 months. Frank slept on the living room floor beside Duke's bed, administering medications, changing bandages, and whispering stories about Michael until both man and dog found themselves healing from different but equally profound wounds. The depression that had nearly consumed Frank following Michael's death gradually retreated in the face of this new purpose. Duke grew into a regal 90-pound shepherd with a distinctive limp and scars that would never fully fade, external reminders of an internal resilience that Frank recognized in himself. Their morning walks became ritual, regardless of weather. With Frank's cardiac condition a constant but unacknowledged companion, Eleanor worried, but she understood the power of their bond. Duke wasn't just a pet. He was the guardian of Frank's fragile peace, the keeper of his renewed will to live. That dog, as Eleanor often told their neighbors on Westridge Lane, didn't just save himself when Frank found him. He saved my husband, too. "You sure about this? Frank weather report says it's gonna pour buckets." Eleanor stood at the kitchen window. coffee mug warming her hands as she watched dark clouds gather over the Douglas firs that bordered their property. It was 6:45 a.m., and Frank was already lacing up his waterproof boots at the door. Frank Mitchell glanced up at his wife with that half-smile that had made her heart skip for nearly 5 decades. "Duke doesn't mind a little rain. Besides, my joints are telling me it's going to hold off for another hour at least." He patted the pocket of his waxed canvas jacket, checking for his heart medication. "We won't go far today, just to the ridge and back." Eleanor nodded, knowing better than to argue. These morning walks were sacred to Frank, especially since his cardiac specialist had suggested limiting his activities 6 months ago. "Just take your phone," she said, pressing it into his hand and kissing his cheek. "And tell that dog of yours to look after you proper." Duke sat patiently by the door, his mismatched eyes following the exchange with an almost human understanding. When Frank finally opened the door, the German Shepherd didn't bolt out as most dogs would. Instead, he waited for Frank's gentle, "Let's go, partner," before stepping carefully onto the porch, always mindful of his human's slower pace. The path into Forest Park was a familiar one, worn smooth by their daily pilgrimages. As they walked, Frank's mind wandered, as it often did these days, contemplating the strange geography of a life that had seen both tremendous loss and unexpected salvation. "You know, Duke," Frank said as they crested the first small hill, the dog attentive at his side, "there comes a point when a man starts counting his days different. Not how many he's had, but how many he's got left." He paused, catching his breath more from emotion than exertion. "I think about Michael this time of year. Wonder what kind of man he'd have grown into at 40. Duke pressed closer to Frank's leg, a warm presence against the morning chill. The dog had never met Michael, but he'd spent countless hours beside the shrine of photographs in the Mitchell living room, listening to Frank's stories about his son. They continued deeper into the forest, the first droplets of rain beginning to penetrate the canopy above. Frank normally would have turned back, but something pulled him forward today, perhaps the clarity of thought that sometimes came with these quiet walks, or simply the pleasure of Duke's companionship in a world that increasingly felt foreign to a man of his generation. The pain began subtly, a tightness in his left arm that Frank attributed to the damp weather. By the time they reached the outlook point 2 miles in, where the trees opened to reveal the silver ribbon of the Columbia River in the distance, the discomfort had intensified. Frank lowered himself carefully onto a fallen log, Duke immediately alert and watchful. "Just need to rest a minute, boy," Frank murmured, reaching for the pill bottle in his pocket. His fingers felt numb, clumsy. The bottle dropped to the forest floor, tiny white tablets scattering among the pine needles. Duke whined, sensing the change in his master. Frank's vision began to blur at the edges. Not his heart, he thought with strange detachment. His brain. The word stroke floated through his consciousness as the forest tilted sideways. His last coherent thought before darkness claimed him was of Eleanor, alone in their kitchen, waiting for a return that might never come. Duke's world collapsed to a single point of focus, his human, now lying motionless on the damp earth. The shepherd nudged Frank's face with his nose, whined, pawed gently at his chest. The familiar scent of his master was overlaid with something wrong, something Duke's instincts recognized as danger. For 4 hours, Duke remained vigilant beside Frank's unconscious form. He licked the man's face, pressed his warm body against Frank's increasingly cold one as the rain began to fall in earnest. Occasionally, he would rise and bark 3 times the alert signal Frank had taught him years ago, but the dense forest absorbed the sound, returning only the patter of raindrops on leaves. As midday approached and Frank's breathing grew more labored, Duke made a decision that defied his most basic training to leave his master's side. With a final lick to Frank's hand, the German shepherd reluctantly backed away, eyes fixed on the still form until the last possible moment before turning and breaking into a determined run toward the main road. Duke navigated the forest with purpose, his powerful legs carrying him over fallen logs and through dense underbrush. The rain had intensified, plastering his fur to his scarred body, but he didn't slow. His mind, operating on something deeper than training or instinct, held a single imperative: find help at the forest's edge, where the trail met forestry road. Duke paused. He knew this area from their walks, knew that humans and vehicles sometimes passed by. He positioned himself in the center of the asphalt and waited, every muscle tense with urgency. 20 minutes passed before Duke heard the distant wail of a siren. His ears perked forward, recognizing the sound from his time with Frank. Help, his instincts told him. Help for his human. The red and white ambulance appeared around the bend, moving fast. Duke stood his ground, eyes fixed on the approaching vehicle, willing it to stop with every fiber of his being. Inside the ambulance, Sarah Donovan was checking equipment while her partner, Jake Reynolds, navigated the rain-slicked road. ETA 3 minutes to Willow Creek, she reported, just as Jake cursed and hit the brakes. "What the hell?" Jake muttered, staring at the soaking wet German shepherd standing like a statue in their path. "Go around it," he said after honking twice. "We've got Old Man Winters probably coding right now." But something in the dog's stance caught Sarah's attention. In her 7 years as an EMT, she'd seen plenty of strays, plenty of lost pets. This was different. The animal's focus, its deliberate placement in their path. "Hold on," Sarah said, unclipping her seatbelt. "Something's not right here." "Sarah, we've got a call." 2 minutes. Give me 2 minutes." She was already pulling on her rain jacket, opening the door to the downpour outside. The German shepherd didn't run when she approached. Instead, it backed up precisely 3 steps, then sat, eyes never leaving hers. When she reached out a hand, it stood again and moved toward the forest edge, looking back expectantly. "I think he wants us to follow him," Sarah called back to Jake, who was watching skeptically from the driver's seat. "We don't have time for lost dogs. Sarah, Mr. Winters, call dispatch. Get Medic 12 to handle Winters. I can't explain it. Jake, but this dog is trying to tell us something." Jake hesitated, then reached for the radio. Sarah's instincts had saved lives before. "This better be good," he muttered. But he was already reaching for his own jacket. The German shepherd, seeing both humans emerging from the vehicle, gave a single authoritative bark and began trotting purposefully into the forest, pausing every few yards to ensure they followed. "If we're chasing Lassie to a well, I'm never letting you live it down," Jake said as they plunged into the woods behind the limping dog. Neither EMT could have anticipated what waited for them deeper in the forest, or how this rain-soaked encounter would change all their lives forever. The German Shepherd moved with remarkable efficiency despite his pronounced limp, navigating the slick terrain as rain continued to pour through the forest canopy. Sarah and Jake struggled to keep pace, their boots sinking into the softening earth with each step. "How much further?" Jake called out, already calculating how much trouble they'd be in for abandoning their assigned call. Procedure was clear: you don't deviate from dispatch instructions without clearance. The dog paused at Jake's voice, turning to fix those mismatched eyes on him with what Sarah could only describe as impatience, before continuing with even greater urgency. "I think he knows we're on borrowed time," Sarah said, pushing a soaked strand of hair from her face. "Come on." They followed the animal for nearly 15 minutes, deeper into the forest than either had expected. Just as Jake was about to call a halt to their unorthodox pursuit, the dog suddenly broke into a sprint, disappearing over a small ridge. "There," Sarah pointed, as they crested the rise. In a small clearing ahead, the German Shepherd stood protectively over the motionless form of an elderly man sprawled beside a fallen log. "Shit," Jake muttered, professional instincts immediately overriding his skepticism. Both EMTs rushed forward, dropping to their knees beside the unconscious figure. Sarah pressed her fingers to the man's neck, finding a weak, irregular pulse. Sir, can you hear me?" The man's skin was cool and clammy, his breathing shallow. "Possible CVA. He's been out here hours, judging by how soaked he is." Jake was already calling it in on his portable radio. "Dispatch, Medic 17. We have a male, approximately 70 years old, unconscious, showing signs of cerebral vascular accident, possibly complicated by hypothermia. Location." He paused, realizing their predicament. "We're going to need GPS coordinates and assistance with extraction. We're at least 2 miles into Forest Park from Forestry Road." The German Shepherd whined anxiously, circling them before settling at the man's head, licking his face with gentle persistence. "This must be his dog," Sarah said, noting the worn leather collar with tags. She gently moved the animal aside to continue her assessment. "Sir, can you open your eyes?" While Jake set up a temporary shelter using their emergency tarp, Sarah managed to check the man's identification. "Frank Mitchell," she read from his driver's license. "Lives on Westridge Lane. We need to contact his family." The shepherd barked once at the name, his attention wholly fixed on Frank's face. "Duke?" Sarah read from the dog's tag. "Is that your name? Boy Duke. You did good bringing us to Frank." As they worked to stabilize Frank, checking vital signs and starting IV fluids, Sarah couldn't help but marvel at the dog's behavior. Duke remained vigilant, but didn't interfere, somehow understanding they were trying to help. His eyes never left Frank's face except to occasionally glance at the medical equipment with unsettling comprehension. "BP's 90, 60, pulse 48, and irregular," Jake reported. "Temperature's down to 94.7. We need to move him now." The extraction team arrived 20 minutes later, an agonizing wait, during which Frank's condition remained precarious. Duke grew increasingly agitated as more strangers appeared, but a gentle word from Sarah seemed to reassure him. "How are we transporting the dog?" one of the park rangers asked as they secured Frank to the rescue basket. "Dog stays here," Jake said automatically. We'll call animal control." "No," Sarah interrupted with unexpected firmness. "The dog comes with us. He saved this man's life." Jake opened his mouth to argue, then closed it at the look on his partner's face. In 7 years working together, he'd never seen Sarah break protocol. "Your call," he conceded. The journey back to the ambulance was treacherous, the team carefully navigating the slippery terrain while carrying Frank's stretcher. Duke followed precisely, somehow understanding the need to stay close without getting underfoot. When they finally reached the vehicle, Sarah made a decision that would later be scrutinized by hospital administration and ultimately change departmental policy. "Duke," she said, patting the back step of the ambulance. "Up." The shepherd hesitated only a moment before jumping in, positioning himself in the corner where he wouldn't interfere with their work but could maintain visual contact with Frank. "Portland Memorial. This is Medic 17. Jake radioed as they pulled away. "We're inbound with a 72-year-old male. Suspected stroke victim with approximately 4 to 5 hours of exposure. Patient is unconscious but stable. ETA 15 minutes. Sarah worked efficiently in the back, monitoring Frank's vitals while establishing a more secure IV line. Duke watched her every move with eerie attentiveness. "Hang in there, Mr. Mitchell," she murmured. "Duke got you help. You just keep fighting." At Portland Memorial Hospital, the emergency team was waiting when they arrived. Dr. Lawrence West, the attending neurologist, barely glanced at Sarah's report before issuing rapid-fire orders to his team. "Get him to CT immediately. I want a complete stroke protocol. Time is brain. People." It wasn't until they were transferring Frank from the ambulance gurney that anyone noticed Duke. The shepherd had remained perfectly still during transit, but now rose to follow as they wheeled Frank away. "Whoa, whoa, whoa," Dr. West said, holding up a hand. "What is that doing here?" "The dog found him and led us to him," Sarah explained quickly. "He's the reason Mr. Mitchell is alive." "And he cannot enter this hospital," Dr. West stated flatly. "You know the rules, Donovan. No animals except service dogs with proper documentation." Duke stood at the threshold of the emergency department doors, his posture rigid with determination. When an orderly tried to guide him away, the shepherd sidestepped without aggression but with clear intention. "Someone call security," Dr. West said dismissively, already turning back to his patient. "Wait," Sarah interjected. "Can I at least take his information? The family will want to know where he is." The doctor waved an impatient hand, and Sarah knelt beside Duke, checking his tags more thoroughly. As she did, a small group began to gather: nurses, orderlies, even a few ambulatory patients, all watching the standoff with interest. "We'll take care of him," a security guard said, approaching with a leash. "Animal control can pick him up." "I'll stay with him," Sarah interrupted. Her shift was technically over, and something about abandoning this animal who had shown such extraordinary loyalty felt profoundly wrong, just until we can contact the family. Word of Duke's heroism spread quickly through the emergency department. While Frank was rushed to diagnostic imaging, Sarah sat with Duke just outside the ambulance bay doors, sheltered from the continuing rain by the overhang. She'd managed to find a bowl of water and some turkey sandwich scraps from the break room, which Duke accepted politely but without enthusiasm, his attention fixed on the hospital doors. "Sarah?" She looked up to see Jake approaching with an elderly woman following close behind. her face etched with worry. "Mrs. Mitchell," Jake explained. "Frank's wife." Eleanor Mitchell was a small woman with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun, her movements quick and precise despite her age. The moment she saw Duke, her composure momentarily cracked. "Oh, Duke," she breathed, dropping to her knees despite the wet pavement. The shepherd went to her immediately, pressing his head against her shoulder in what looked remarkably like an embrace. "You found help?" "Good boy. My good boy." Sarah watched the reunion with a tightness in her throat. "Mrs. Mitchell, your husband is getting a CT scan right now. Dr. West is our best neurologist. Frank's in good hands." Eleanor nodded, gathering herself visibly. "I told him not to go out in this weather. But Frank and Duke, they've walked every morning for 8 years. Rain or shine." She stroked the dog's damp fur. "Duke saved him once before. You know, not like this, but—" "What do you mean?" Sarah asked gently. Eleanor's eyes grew distant. "Frank was in a bad way after we lost our son. Michael was a Marine. Afghanistan." She didn't need to elaborate. "Frank found Duke during a police raid. Dogfighting ring. This poor animal was barely alive, but something about him. Frank said he saw the will to live in those eyes, so they saved each other." A hospital administrator approached, clipboard in hand. "Mrs. Mitchell, we need your insurance information and medical history for your husband." Eleanor straightened, her nurse's training evident in her efficient nod. "Of course." She turned to Sarah. "Will you stay with Duke? He doesn't do well with strangers since what happened to him." "Of course," Sarah promised. "We'll be right here." As Eleanor disappeared through the sliding doors, Sarah settled back beside Duke, who had positioned himself facing the entrance, his vigil unwavering. "You know he's in there, don't you?" she murmured, resting a hand on his damp fur. The shepherd sighed deeply, but didn't move. "Don't worry. We're not going anywhere." She couldn't have known then how prophetic those words would prove to be, or how the presence of one determined dog was about to challenge everything from hospital policy to her own understanding of loyalty and healing. The first night was the hardest. Rain continued to fall in heavy sheets across Portland, turning the hospital parking lot into a shallow lake that reflected the emergency room's pulsing lights. Sarah had stayed well past her shift, helping Eleanor navigate the bewildering maze of medical bureaucracy until Jake finally insisted on driving her home. "You've done enough," he told her, glancing at Duke, who remained stationed outside the ER doors. "The dog will be fine. Animal control can—" "Don't even suggest it," Sarah cut him off. "Mrs. Mitchell says she'll come back for him once Frank is stabilized." Jake shook his head. "Have it your way, but you need sleep." After extracting a promise from the night security guard, a Vietnam veteran named Bill, who seemed to understand Duke's vigil without explanation, Sarah reluctantly left. Duke hadn't moved from his spot, his eyes fixed on the hospital entrance with unwavering focus. By morning, word of the shepherd's loyalty had spread through the hospital staff. Nurses ending their night shifts brought scraps from their lunches. An orderly rigged a makeshift shelter from a plastic tarp. Bill, the security guard, placed a worn moving blanket beside Duke, who acknowledged these kindnesses with dignified restraint but never abandoned his post. Eleanor returned at dawn, her face drawn from a sleepless night spent in the ICU waiting room. Frank had survived the critical first 12 hours, but the neurologist's prognosis remained guarded. The stroke had been severe, affecting the left side of his brain. If he recovered, speech and mobility on his right side would likely be compromised. If, Eleanor repeated, her nurse's training allowing her to understand the implications Dr. West wouldn't explicitly state. She sat beside Duke on the cold concrete, one arm around his powerful shoulders. "Your daddy's a fighter, though, just like you." Duke leaned into her, offering warmth and comfort, even as his eyes remained fixed on the doors separating him from Frank. By the second day, local media had caught wind of the story. A reporter from the Oregonian approached as Eleanor was bringing Duke fresh water. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Diane Lawson from the Oregonian. We'd love to share your husband and Duke's story. Would you have a moment to talk?" Eleanor hesitated, one hand protectively on Duke's head. "I'm not sure this is the time. People should know," the reporter said gently. "About loyalty like this. About Duke." Something in her tone made Eleanor reconsider. She nodded slowly. "All right. But understand, this isn't just about a dog saving his owner. Duke and Frank. Their story started long before yesterday." As morning sun finally broke through the clouds, Eleanor shared the story that would soon capture Portland's heart. "It was 2015, she began, her voice strengthening as she spoke. Frank was still with Portland PD, though close to retirement. They got a tip about an illegal dogfighting operation running out of an abandoned warehouse in St. John's. Duke shifted at her feet, as if he knew she was telling his story. Frank was first through the door, said it was the worst thing he'd ever seen, and this is a man who'd worked homicide for 15 years. Eleanor's eyes grew distant. Most of the dogs were already dead, or so far gone they had to be euthanized on sight. But in the back, Frank found a cage with this half-starved puppy. Couldn't have been more than 6 months old. She stroked Duke's scarred ear. The handler had been training him to fight, but decided he was too gentle, was going to use him as bait instead. Her voice hardened. They'd already started cutting his ear to make him mean, had beaten him so badly 2 ribs were broken. Frank said when he opened that cage, Duke didn't growl or cower. He just looked up with those mismatched eyes like he was saying, "What took you so long?" The reporter listened, taking notes as Eleanor continued. "Frank brought him straight home. Didn't even call me first. Just walked through the door, holding this bloody bundle of fur, and said, 'His name is Duke,' like he'd known him his whole life." Eleanor's story painted a vivid picture: Frank sleeping on the floor beside Duke's bed for months during his recovery. The careful rehabilitation of a dog who by all rights should have feared humans forever. The gradual healing that took place between man and animal. "But the real miracle," Eleanor said, her voice softening, "was what Duke did for Frank. We'd lost our son Michael in Afghanistan 2 years earlier. Frank had shut down, was just going through the motions. The department psychologist was talking medical retirement because Frank couldn't connect anymore." She looked down at Duke with profound gratitude. "This dog brought him back. Gave him purpose when nothing else could." The reporter's article appeared in the next day's paper, accompanied by a photograph of Duke maintaining his steadfast vigil outside the hospital. By that afternoon, Portland Memorial's switchboard was flooded with calls from citizens asking about both Frank and his loyal companion. Dr. Lawrence West was not impressed. "This is a hospital, not a human interest story," he informed the head nurse after finding several staff members huddled around a copy of the newspaper. "And that animal still cannot enter this building. It's against policy, not to mention health regulations." Nancy Thompson. The veteran charge nurse who had worked at Portland Memorial for 30 years fixed Dr. West with a measured look. "With respect, Doctor, there are provisions in our policy for therapy animals. Perhaps—" "That mutt isn't a certified therapy dog," West interrupted. "It's a former fighting dog with who knows what behavioral issues. The liability alone—" "His name is Duke," Nancy corrected quietly, "and he saved Mr. Mitchell's life." Dr. West's expression hardened. "Sentiment doesn't change hospital policy. Nurse Thompson, see that your staff remembers that." The confrontation set the tone for what would become an increasingly divided hospital. While Dr. West remained adamantly opposed to any exception for Duke, a growing contingent of staff members found ways to support both Eleanor and her devoted shepherd. Cafeteria workers set aside scraps. Maintenance provided a larger tarp when rain returned. Even some board members who had read the newspaper article stopped by to meet the dog whose loyalty had become a symbol of devotion. On the third day, Sarah returned during her off hours, bringing a proper leash and collar to replace Duke's weathered one. "How is he?" she asked Eleanor, who looked exhausted but managed a small smile. "Holding his own. The latest scan shows the swelling in his brain is stabilizing." She didn't add what Dr. West had told her privately, that even if Frank regained consciousness, the damage might be too extensive for meaningful recovery. Duke greeted Sarah with dignified recognition, accepting her gentle pat before resuming his vigilant watch of the hospital entrance. "And how's our hero doing?" Sarah asked, kneeling to check the shepherd's scarred paws, which had become raw from constant exposure to wet concrete. "Stubborn as his master," Eleanor sighed. "Won't leave to go home even for an hour. I tried yesterday, but he pulled free and came right back. Started howling something awful when he couldn't find Frank." Sarah nodded, understanding the dog's distress. "I've been thinking. There's research about animal therapy for stroke patients. Some studies show significant improvement in recovery when bonded animals are part of the rehabilitation process." Hope flickered briefly in Eleanor's tired eyes. "Dr. West won't hear of it. Says Duke's not a certified therapy animal." "Maybe not officially," Sarah conceded, "but the connection between them is real. And right now, Frank needs every advantage he can get." Their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of a tall, distinguished man in his 60s, accompanied by a younger woman carrying a professional camera. "Mrs. Mitchell, I'm Robert Daniels, hospital board chairman." He extended his hand. "I wanted to meet Duke personally and to discuss a potential solution to our situation." Eleanor straightened, suddenly alert. "What kind of solution?" "The board has been following your story. We've also received over 300 calls from community members asking how they can help." He glanced at Duke with genuine admiration. "It seems your dog has become something of a local hero." The photographer snapped a few respectful photos of Duke, who acknowledged her with a brief glance before returning to his vigil. "We'd like to explore the possibility of a supervised visit." Daniels continued. "If Dr. West agrees that Mr. Mitchell is stable enough, and if Duke can meet certain basic requirements, "What requirements?" Eleanor asked, trying not to let hope overwhelm caution. "A veterinary check to ensure he's healthy, basic behavioral assessment, and of course, he would need to be cleaned thoroughly before entering the hospital." Sarah watched Eleanor's face transform. "He'll pass any test you give him. Frank trained him himself. Duke understands dozens of commands, never shows aggression." "I believe you," Daniel said gently. "But we need to document it officially. Hospital policy." As they discussed logistics, Sarah noticed Duke had shifted his attention fully to their conversation, his intelligent eyes moving between speakers as if following every word. The shepherd's perceptiveness was uncanny, almost as if he understood exactly what was at stake. By the fourth day, Duke had become Portland's most famous dog. A local news station ran a feature on the loyal shepherd, complete with interviews from the EMTs who had followed him to Frank. A social media campaign with the hashtag #LetDukeIn had gone viral, with thousands of supporters calling for the hospital to allow the dog to visit his owner. The pressure intensified when veterans groups became involved, drawn by the connection between Frank's military service and his rescue of Duke. A small but respectful gathering of former servicemen assembled outside the hospital, many accompanied by their own service dogs. "This isn't about bending rules," one Vietnam veteran told reporters. "It's about recognizing that healing comes in many forms. Sometimes the best medicine isn't in a pill bottle or an IV bag. Sometimes it's the love of a loyal companion." Inside the hospital, Frank Mitchell remained unconscious, his condition stabilized but unchanged. Eleanor divided her time between his bedside and Duke's vigil outside, growing more haggard with each passing day. The doctors had explained that the longer Frank remained unresponsive, the less likely a meaningful recovery became. On the morning of the fifth day, the hospital board convened an emergency meeting. Dr. West presented his medical concerns, citing infection control protocols and potential liability issues. Advocates, including Nurse Thompson and, surprisingly, the hospital's risk management officer, argued that the potential benefits outweighed the risks. "The research on animal therapy for stroke patients is compelling," the risk officer noted. "And frankly, the PR disaster if this man dies without seeing his dog after everything we've heard about their bond would be significant." Dr. West's expression darkened. "So we're making medical decisions based on public relations now. We're considering all factors," Chairman Daniels corrected. "Including Mr. Mitchell's psychological well-being, should he regain consciousness." After 2 hours of debate, the board reached a compromise. Duke would be permitted one 15-minute supervised visit, provided he passed veterinary inspection and behavioral assessment. The visit would take place in a controlled environment, with appropriate staff present. When Eleanor received the news, tears of relief streamed down her face. She knelt beside Duke, taking his noble head between her hands. "You're going to see Frank," she told him, voice breaking. "You just have to pass a few tests first." "Okay, be on your best behavior." The shepherd's tail wagged once, solemnly, as if acknowledging the gravity of the situation. A local veterinarian volunteered her services, conducting a thorough examination in a quiet corner of the hospital parking garage. Despite nearly a week of exposure to the elements, Duke was in remarkably good health, though the vet noted mild dehydration and stress. "He's physically sound," she reported. "No signs of aggression or anxiety beyond what's expected given the circumstances. I'd clear him for the visit." The behavioral assessment proved even easier. A certified animal therapist put Duke through a series of basic commands and scenarios, watching with growing admiration as the shepherd responded with perfect composure. "I've evaluated hundreds of therapy dogs," she told Eleanor afterward. "Few have Duke's level of focus and self-control. Whoever trained him did an exceptional job." "Frank would be so proud," Eleanor whispered, running a trembling hand over Duke's head. The visit was scheduled for noon the following day. Hospital maintenance converted a small private room adjacent to the ICU, removing unnecessary equipment and creating a controlled environment where Duke could safely see Frank without compromising sterile areas. That night, Eleanor took Duke home for the first time since Frank's stroke. The shepherd needed proper bathing before his hospital visit, though he remained reluctant to leave his post. Only Eleanor's gentle coaxing and the promise of returning convinced him to enter her car. The Mitchell home on Westridge Lane stood silent and empty, filled with evidence of Frank's absence. His reading glasses lay on the side table beside his favorite chair. The coffee mug he'd used that fateful morning still sat in the dish drainer. Duke moved through the room slowly, nose working, tracking the lingering scent of his master. In the living room, he stopped before the wall of photographs, Frank in his police uniform, Eleanor in her nurse's whites, and centered prominently, a young Marine in dress blues with Frank's jawline and Eleanor's gentle eyes. Duke sat before this shrine, his posture alert, but somehow mournful. "That's Michael," Eleanor said softly, kneeling beside him. "You know all about him, don't you? Frank's told you all the stories?" She ran her fingers through Duke's fur, still damp from the week spent in Portland's rain. "Frank's going to need you more than ever now. Duke, whatever happens tomorrow, whatever the doctors say, you're our family. The only family we have left." In the master bathroom, Eleanor gently bathed Duke, washing away a week's worth of grime and fear. The shepherd submitted to this indignity with stoic patience, understanding instinctively that this ritual was necessary for what would come next. Afterward, as Eleanor tried to sleep in a bed that felt too empty without Frank, Duke took up position at the bedroom door, alert and watchful, waiting for morning to come, waiting for his chance to see the man who had saved him, the man he had now saved in return. Morning arrived with uncharacteristic clarity, the storm system that had drenched Portland for nearly a week finally moving eastward. Sunlight streamed through the windows of the Mitchell home, finding Eleanor already awake, ironing a fresh set of clothes with mechanical precision. She hadn't slept more than an hour, her mind cycling between hope and dread for the day ahead. Duke sat watching her from the kitchen doorway, freshly bathed and brushed, his mismatched eyes following her every movement. The shepherd seemed to understand the significance of this day. He had eaten the breakfast Eleanor prepared without his usual hesitation, and submitted to a final grooming with dignified patience. "You look handsome," Eleanor told him, kneeling to straighten the new collar she'd purchased yesterday, dark blue nylon, that complemented his German shepherd coloring. "Frank would be proud." At precisely 10:30 a.m., Eleanor's phone rang. It was Sarah Donovan. "Mrs. Mitchell, just checking you're still on for noon. I'll meet you at the south entrance. We've arranged for a security escort to bring you directly to the prepared room." Eleanor confirmed their plans, her voice steady despite the emotion threatening to overwhelm her. She'd been a nurse for 40 years before retirement. She understood the medical realities of Frank's condition. This visit might be less about Frank recognizing Duke and more about giving Duke a chance to say goodbye. The drive to Portland Memorial took exactly 17 minutes. Duke sat in the back seat, more alert than he'd been all week, his posture straight and attentive as they approached the hospital. Eleanor could almost imagine Frank beside her, telling her not to worry in that gruff, tender way of his. "It'll be fine, Ellie," he would have said. "That dog's got more sense than half the doctors in there." The thought brought a sad smile to her face as she parked in the space reserved for them near the south entrance. True to her word, Sarah was waiting outside, dressed in civilian clothes rather than her EMT uniform. Beside her stood Nancy Thompson, the charge nurse who had become their most steadfast advocate within the hospital. "Everything's ready," Nancy assured Eleanor as they approached. "Dr. West did his rounds early this morning, so he's in surgery for the next few hours." The slight emphasis on this information made it clear this timing was not accidental. Duke walked perfectly at Eleanor's side. No leash needed, his powerful body radiating controlled energy. Several hospital staff members stopped to watch as he passed, his dignified bearing commanding respect despite the scars that marked him as a survivor. "We had to make some adjustments to the plan," Sarah explained as they walked. "Frank had a restless night. His vitals are stable, but Dr. Chen she's covering while Dr. West is in surgery thought it best not to move him to the prepared room." Eleanor's heart sank. "Does that mean—" "It means we're bringing Duke directly to Frank's ICU room instead," Nancy finished with a conspiratorial smile. "Dr. Chen authorized it. Said if we're doing this, we should do it where Frank is most comfortable and stable." Relief washed over Eleanor. "Thank you," she whispered. They paused outside the ICU doors while Nancy reviewed the protocols they'd established. Duke would be allowed 15 minutes with Frank. A veterinary technician and Dr. Chen would monitor the visit. If at any point Frank's vitals showed distress, or if Duke became agitated, the visit would end immediately. "Are you ready?" Sarah asked, addressing both Eleanor and Duke with equal seriousness. Duke's ears perked forward, his entire being focused on the doors ahead, as if he could already sense Frank's presence beyond them. Eleanor nodded, one hand resting on the shepherd's solid shoulder. The ICU was unusually quiet as they entered, the regular beeping of monitors and soft conversations of medical staff creating a subdued backdrop. Eleanor recognized the hush that fell as they approached Frank's room, a mixture of curiosity and respect from the medical professionals who had been following their story. Dr. Chen, a petite woman with compassionate eyes and efficient movements, met them outside Frank's door. "Mrs. Mitchell?" She greeted Eleanor warmly before turning her attention to Duke. She crouched slightly, allowing the shepherd to catch her scent without crowding him. "And you must be the famous Duke. It's an honor to meet you." Duke acknowledged her with appropriate gravity, his behavior impeccable despite the unfamiliar environment and antiseptic smells that must have been overwhelming to his sensitive nose. "Before we go in," Dr. Chen said gently, "I want to prepare you." Frank remains unresponsive, though his vitals have stabilized. There's no way to predict how this visit might affect him, or if he'll be aware of Duke's presence at all. "Do you understand?" Eleanor nodded, her nurse's training allowing her to process this information with outward calm. "I understand, but Duke deserves this chance. And so does Frank." Dr. Chen smiled. "I agree," Let's proceed. The ICU room was standard-issue medical equipment crowding around a hospital bed where Frank Mitchell lay still and pale. A breathing tube assisting his respiration. IV lines delivering fluids and medication. Eleanor had become painfully familiar with this tableau over the past week. But now she watched Duke, wondering how he would react to seeing his beloved master in this diminished state. The shepherd stopped at the threshold, his body going completely still. For a terrible moment, Eleanor feared he might bolt or become distressed. Instead, Duke's entire demeanor changed in a subtle but profound way. The alertness remained, but his movements became extraordinarily gentle as he stepped forward with careful, measured steps. "It's okay, Duke," Eleanor encouraged softly. "You can go to him." The medical staff watched in silence as Duke approached the bed. The shepherd moved with such delicacy that the floor didn't creak beneath his weight. When he reached Frank's side, he slowly raised his head until he could see his master's face. Duke's nose twitched, taking in Frank's scent beneath the overlay of antiseptic and illness. Then, with heartbreaking gentleness, Duke rested his muzzle on the edge of the mattress, his eyes never leaving Frank's face. "His vitals are holding steady," Dr. Chen murmured, watching the monitors. "No adverse reaction." Eleanor moved to the opposite side of the bed, taking Frank's limp hand in hers. "Frank," she said clearly, "Duke is here. He found help for you. Sweetheart, he saved your life." Duke's ears twitched at Frank's name. The shepherd made a soft sound, not quite a whine, something more nuanced and controlled. "You can come closer, Duke," Eleanor encouraged. "It's okay." With exquisite care, Duke raised himself just enough to rest his chin on the edge of the bed beside Frank's hand. His breath warmed Frank's fingers, those fingers that had rescued him from a cage 8 years ago, that had patiently trained him, that had stroked his fur every night before bed. The room fell silent except for the steady beeping of the cardiac monitor. Everyone present, Dr. Chen, Sarah, Nancy. The vet tech seemed to hold their collective breath, witnessing something that transcended ordinary human-animal interaction. "Frank always said Duke understood every word he said," Eleanor commented softly. "Used to have full conversations with him." As if responding to her voice, Duke gently nudged Frank's hand with his nose. When there was no response, the shepherd shifted his position slightly, moving his head under Frank's fingers so they rested on his fur. Then something extraordinary happened. Frank's index finger twitched. Dr. Chen moved forward immediately, checking the monitors. "Did you see that?" she asked quietly, professional reserve not quite masking her excitement. Eleanor nodded, afraid to speak lest she break whatever tenuous connection had formed. Duke remained perfectly still, Frank's fingers now resting against his ear. The finger twitched again then, with visible effort. Frank's hand moved a fraction of an inch, curling slightly into Duke's fur. "Frank," Eleanor whispered, squeezing his other hand. "Frank, can you hear me?" The cardiac monitor showed a subtle but definite change. Frank's heart rate increasing slightly, becoming more regular. Duke made that soft sound again, his tail moving in a single, restrained wag. "This is a positive response," Chen confirmed, her voice carefully measured. "It may be reflexive, but it's significant." Eleanor remembered countless evenings watching Frank and Duke together, how her husband's gnarled hands would stroke the shepherd's fur with absent-minded affection while they watched television, how Duke would position himself to maximize contact, their silent communication more eloquent than words. "Keep talking to him," Dr. Chen encouraged. "Both of you—" Eleanor leaned closer. "Frank Mitchell, Duke came all this way to see you. He's been waiting outside this hospital for days. The whole city's talking about your stubborn dog." As she spoke, Duke shifted position again, this time raising his head until his face was level with Frank's. The shepherd's breath fogged the oxygen mask slightly, his mismatched eyes fixed on Frank's closed ones with unwavering intensity. A shudder passed through Frank's body. His eyelids fluttered. "Frank," Eleanor's voice broke. "Sweetheart, Doctor." Chen was already adjusting equipment, her movements efficient, but excitement visible in her quick glances between patient and monitors. "This is very encouraging. Keep going." Duke made a sound, then not his usual bark, but a specific vocalization that Eleanor recognized immediately. It was the sound Duke made each morning when Frank would ask, "Ready for our walk?" Frank's eyelids fluttered again, then opened halfway. His gaze was unfocused at first, roaming the room without recognition. Then Duke made the sound once more, and Frank's eyes shifted, finding the shepherd's face inches from his own. The change was subtle but unmistakable, a spark of awareness, of recognition. "Duke," Frank mouthed silently around the breathing tube, no sound emerging but the shape of the word clear on his lips. Eleanor pressed her hand to her mouth, tears flowing freely now. Sarah and Nancy exchanged emotional glances, while Dr. Chen quickly made notes in Frank's chart, her professional demeanor barely containing her excitement. "This is remarkable," the doctor said quietly. "This level of response after a stroke of this severity." Duke maintained perfect position, his body still except for his tail, which now moved in a slow, steady rhythm. Frank's fingers had curled more securely into the shepherd's fur, and his eyes, though heavy-lidded, remained fixed on Duke's face. "I think he's trying to communicate," Eleanor said, wiping tears with her free hand. "Frank always said Duke could understand him better than most people." As if confirming her words, Duke very carefully shifted position, moving slightly closer so that his muzzle gently touched Frank's cheek. The shepherd held this position for a moment, then pulled back to look at Frank again. The gesture carried all the appearance of deliberate reassurance. Frank's vital signs continued to strengthen. His oxygen saturation improved, and the cardiac monitor showed a steady rhythm that had been absent all week. "I've read about cases like this," Dr. Chen said, "but seeing it firsthand—" She shook her head in wonder. The neurological pathways associated with long-term emotional bonds can sometimes remain intact, even when other functions are compromised by stroke. Duke is essentially providing a powerful stimulus that Frank's brain recognizes as significant. The technical explanation didn't begin to capture the profound connection unfolding before them. Duke maintained his position beside Frank, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed to keep Frank's attention focused. Frank, for his part, kept his hand in Duke's fur, his eyes drifting closed occasionally but always opening again to find the shepherd still there. When the 15-minute limit approached, Dr. Chen checked her watch reluctantly. "We should probably—" "5 more minutes," Nancy interjected with gentle authority. "His vitals are better than they've been all week." Dr. Chen hesitated, then nodded. 5 minutes. But then we need to let Mr. Mitchell rest. Duke seemed to sense the temporary reprieve, making efficient use of the additional time. The shepherd carefully repositioned himself so that more of his body was accessible to Frank's limited range of motion. Frank's fingers flexed weakly in the thick fur, his eyes communicating what his voice could not. "You're doing great, Frank," Eleanor encouraged, her own hand never leaving his. "Duke's been waiting to see you. He's been so brave." As the extended time drew to a close, Dr. Chen approached gently. "Mrs. Mitchell, we need to let your husband rest now. This response is extremely encouraging, but we don't want to overtax him." Eleanor nodded, understanding the medical necessity even as her heart ached at the thought of separating Frank and Duke again. "Duke," she said softly, "we have to go now, but we'll come back." The shepherd looked at her, then back at Frank, his intelligent eyes reflecting what seemed like genuine comprehension. "With infinite care." Duke leaned forward one last time, touching his nose to Frank's cheek in a gesture so gentle and deliberate it brought fresh tears to everyone watching. "We'll be back tomorrow," Eleanor promised Frank, squeezing his hand. "Duke and I both. You just rest and get stronger." As they prepared to leave, Frank's eyes followed Duke, a single tear tracking down his weathered cheek. The shepherd walked backward for the first few steps, maintaining eye contact until the last possible moment before turning to follow Eleanor from the room with dignified restraint. Outside in the hallway, Dr. Chen couldn't contain her professional excitement. That was remarkable. His neurological response exceeded all expectations. "I want to adjust his treatment plan immediately and schedule another visit as soon as possible." Sarah, who had witnessed the entire interaction, placed a supportive hand on Eleanor's shoulder. "Duke did it," she said simply. "He reached Frank when nothing else could." Eleanor nodded, too overwhelmed for words. She knelt beside Duke, who had maintained perfect composure throughout the emotional visit, and wrapped her arms around his powerful neck. "Good boy," she whispered against his fur. "The very best boy." For the first time in a week, Duke's vigilant posture relaxed slightly, as if some vital mission had been accomplished. The shepherd leaned into Eleanor's embrace, offering comfort even as his eyes remained fixed on the door behind which Frank lay, finally awakened from the darkness by the presence of his most faithful friend. News of Frank's response spread through Portland Memorial like wildfire. By evening, the hospital staff had divided into two distinct camps, those who viewed Duke's visit as a remarkable but isolated incident, and those who saw it as confirmation of what they had suspected all along, that the bond between man and dog transcended conventional medical understanding. Dr. Lawrence West returned from surgery to find his carefully constructed treatment plan altered and his patient showing unexpected signs of neurological response. His displeasure was evident as he reviewed Frank's chart, his expression darkening with each note from Dr. Chen. "This is highly irregular," he informed Eleanor when he found her in the ICU waiting room that evening. "While I appreciate that Mr. Mitchell showed some response, allowing an animal into the ICU circumvented multiple infection control protocols." Eleanor, exhausted but buoyed by the day's developments, met his gaze steadily. "With all due respect, Doctor, Duke's visit accomplished more in 15 minutes than a week of conventional treatment." Correlation is not causation. Mrs. Mitchell, your husband might have shown those same responses today regardless of the dog's presence. His tone was professionally neutral. But Eleanor detected the underlying rigidity that had characterized their interactions from the beginning. Frank recognized Duke, she insisted. I saw it in his eyes. What you observed was likely a primitive neurological response to a familiar stimulus. It doesn't necessarily indicate meaningful recovery. Dr. West closed the chart with finality. I've countermanded Dr. Chen's order for additional visits. We need to focus on evidence-based treatment protocols without emotional distractions. Eleanor felt a surge of anger she rarely permitted herself. That emotional distraction is the reason Frank is still alive. I understand you're upset, but my responsibility is to your husband's medical care. Further visits present unnecessary risks. As Dr. West walked away, Eleanor fought back tears of frustration. The brief breakthrough with Duke had kindled hope she hadn't dared feel all week. Now that hope seemed in jeopardy. Sarah found her there an hour later, still sitting with her head in her hands. Mrs. Mitchell, is everything okay? Eleanor explained Dr. West's decision, her voice steady despite her exhaustion. After all Duke's done, after seeing how Frank responded to him, I don't understand such stubbornness. Sarah sat beside her. How's Duke doing? I left him with our neighbor while I came back for evening visiting hours. He seemed tired, but satisfied somehow, like he accomplished what he needed to today. Eleanor paused. But I'm worried about him too. He barely ate his dinner, and Mrs. Abernathy said he kept pacing and looking out the window. Sarah hesitated, then asked, Has Duke had a veterinary checkup recently? A thorough one, I mean, not since his annual visit last January. Why? Just something I noticed today. He seemed to be favoring his left side slightly, and his breathing was a bit labored after our walk to the ICU. Sarah quickly added, It could be nothing. Stress and sleeping outdoors for days would tax any dog. But given everything he's been through, Eleanor felt a fresh wave of worry. In her focus on Frank, had she overlooked Duke's needs? The shepherd was 8 years old, no longer young for his breed, and had endured extraordinary stress over the past week. I'll call Dr. Winters first thing tomorrow, she promised. But tomorrow brought its own complications. Frank's condition, which had seemed to improve following Duke's visit, deteriorated overnight. Eleanor arrived at the hospital to find increased activity around his room and Dr. West in urgent consultation with 2 colleagues. What's happened? She demanded, maternal instinct overriding hospital protocols as she pushed into the room. Dr. West turned, his expression grim. Mr. Mitchell has developed pneumonia, a common complication in stroke patients with compromised swallowing reflexes. We've started broad-spectrum antibiotics, but given his age and weakened state, he didn't need to finish. Eleanor understood the implications all too well from her years of nursing. Pneumonia was often the final complication that claimed elderly stroke patients. His fever's 103.2. Dr. West continued. We're working to bring it down, but I need to prepare you. The next 24 hours will be critical. Eleanor moved to Frank's bedside, taking his hot, dry hand in hers. His breathing was labored, his color poor. The improvement she'd witnessed yesterday had vanished, replaced by the gray pallor of serious illness. Fight, Frank, she whispered. please fight," while Frank battled pneumonia. Duke faced his own crisis. Eleanor had left him with Mrs. Abernathy again, promising to return by noon, but her neighbor called the hospital at 10:30, panic evident in her voice. "Eleanor, I think something's wrong with Duke. He collapsed in the backyard. I've called the vet, but I thought you should know right away." Eleanor felt her world tilting sideways. Not Duke, too. Not now. Dr. Jessica Winters met Eleanor at her veterinary clinic an hour later, her expression serious as she led her into the examination room where Duke lay on a padded table, an IV in his foreleg and monitoring equipment attached to his chest. "What's wrong with him?" Eleanor asked, stroking Duke's head. The shepherd acknowledged her with a faint thump of his tail, but his usual alertness was absent. "Multiple issues, I'm afraid," Dr. Winters said gently. "Dehydration. Despite your best efforts to keep him hydrated, exhaustion, some inflammation in his lungs from exposure to the elements last week." She hesitated. "But I'm most concerned about his heart. His heart. I'm detecting arrhythmia and some signs of cardiomyopathy, heart muscle disease. It's not uncommon in German shepherds, especially those who've experienced severe physical stress or trauma, given Duke's history before you adopted him." Eleanor remembered Frank's words from years ago. "This dog's been through hell, Ellie, but he's got heart like you wouldn't believe." "Is it serious?" Eleanor managed to ask. "It requires immediate attention. I'd like to keep him here for at least 24 hours for medication, fluids, and monitoring." Dr. Winters' expression softened. "Eleanor, I know about Frank. This timing couldn't be worse. But Duke needs proper care right now." Eleanor nodded, tears threatening again. The cruel irony wasn't lost on her, both Frank and Duke, the two beings she loved most in the world, simultaneously fighting for their lives, each with heart problems that had gone undetected until crisis struck. "Do whatever you need to do," she told the veterinarian. "Duke saved Frank. We owe him the same chance." Throughout that long afternoon, Eleanor divided her time between phone calls to the veterinary clinic and sitting beside Frank's bed, watching his fever climb despite aggressive treatment. By evening, Dr. West called in a pulmonologist for consultation. "The antibiotics aren't working as quickly as we'd hoped," he explained, professional detachment giving way to genuine concern. "His respiratory function is declining." "What are our options?" Eleanor asked, falling back on her nursing training to maintain composure. "We can intubate if necessary, put him on a ventilator, but given the extent of his neurological damage, we need to consider whether that's in his best interest." The implication was clear. They were approaching end-of-life decisions. Eleanor felt the weight of them pressing down like a physical force. "I need time," she said. "Just give him more time." Dr. West nodded, his earlier rigidity softening slightly. "We'll continue aggressive treatment through the night. But Mrs. Mitchell, I think you should prepare yourself. Call any family or friends you might want present." "We don't have family," Eleanor said quietly. "Just Duke. And he's—" Her voice broke. "He's at the vet's with heart problems." Something shifted in Dr. West's expression, a flicker of genuine compassion breaking through his clinical reserve. "I'm sorry," he said. And for the first time, Eleanor believed he meant it. That night, Eleanor sat in the ICU beside Frank. holding his burning hand as nurses came and went, adjusting medications, checking vital signs, exchanging worried glances they thought she didn't notice. Outside, rain had returned to Portland, pattering against the windows in a rhythm that seemed to echo her own faltering hope. "Don't you leave me," she whispered to Frank. "Not you and Duke both. I couldn't bear it." She thought of Duke, alone at the veterinary clinic, perhaps wondering where his people were, why they had abandoned him in his time of need. The thought was nearly unbearable. As midnight approached, Eleanor rested her head on the edge of Frank's bed, still holding his hand, and allowed exhaustion to claim her. Her last conscious thought was a prayer not to any specific deity, but to whatever force in the universe might be listening. Please, not both of them. Please don't take them both. Dawn broke with sullen reluctance over Portland. Gray light seeping through the blinds of Frank's ICU room where Eleanor had spent a fitful night in the visitor's chair. A gentle hand on her shoulder roused her from thin sleep. "Mrs. Mitchell." It was Nancy Thompson, the veteran charge nurse, her face etched with concern. "I thought you should know, Dr. West has called a meeting with the neurology team. They're discussing Frank's care plan going forward." Eleanor straightened, wincing at the stiffness in her neck. "His fever, still high, 102.8. The antibiotics aren't working as quickly as we'd hoped." Nancy's voice lowered. "I shouldn't tell you this, but they're discussing whether to continue aggressive treatment or shift to comfort measures." The euphemism hung in the air between them. Comfort measures meant letting Frank go, making him comfortable while pneumonia claimed him. Eleanor's nursing background left her no illusions about what that meant. "He's not ready to go," Eleanor said with quiet certainty. "Frank's a fighter. He always has been." Nancy nodded sympathetically. "I believe you. But Dr. West is concerned about prolonging suffering when recovery seems limited." Eleanor turned to look at Frank. His face flushed with fever, breath coming in labored gasps despite supplemental oxygen. She thought of all they had weathered together losing Michael. Frank's difficult last years on the force, rebuilding their lives around the quiet rhythms of retirement. She couldn't accept that this was how their story would end. "I need to make a call," she said suddenly. "Can you stay with him for a few minutes?" Outside in the family waiting area, Eleanor called Dr. Winter's veterinary clinic. The overnight technician answered immediately. "Mrs. Mitchell, I was just about to call you. Duke had a restless night. Dr. Winters is with him now." Eleanor's heart sank. "Is he worse?" "Not exactly, but he's agitated. Won't settle." "Dr. Winters is concerned the stress might aggravate his heart condition." "Put her on, please," Eleanor requested, a plan forming in her mind that seemed equal parts desperate and inevitable. When Dr. Winters came to the phone, Eleanor didn't waste time with preliminaries. "Jessica, Frank's condition is critical. The doctors are talking about withdrawing treatment." Her voice caught. "I need to ask something that might sound crazy." "Go ahead," the veterinarian replied gently. "Duke reached Frank when nothing else could. Is he stable enough to come to the hospital one last time?" There was a pause. Then Dr. Winters spoke carefully. "Medically speaking, it's not advisable. His heart condition needs monitoring, and the stress could be problematic. Another pause. But as someone who's worked with animals for 20 years, I understand what you're asking and why. Would you help me? Eleanor asked. I can't lose them both, Jessica. I just can't. Let me stabilize him first. Give me 2 hours. Then we'll talk about how to make this happen. Eleanor returned to Frank's room with renewed purpose. Nancy had been joined by Sarah Donovan, who had stopped by before her shift. Any change? Eleanor asked. Nancy shook her head. Dr. West will be here soon with the team. Sarah studied Eleanor's face. You're planning something, aren't you? I need to talk to Dr. Chen, Eleanor said. Is she on duty today? She's covering the neurology ward this morning, Nancy confirmed. But Eleanor, what are you thinking? That sometimes we need to trust something beyond medical textbooks? Eleanor straightened her shoulders. Frank responded to Duke once. He might again. Sarah and Nancy exchanged glances. Dr. West was very clear about no more visits, Nancy cautioned. Then we'll need to be creative, Eleanor replied. Will you help me? The meeting with the medical team unfolded exactly as Eleanor had feared. West, flanked by the pulmonologist and a hospital administrator, presented the facts with clinical precision. Frank's pneumonia was proving resistant to treatment, his neurological damage was extensive, and his chances for meaningful recovery were diminishing by the hour. Given Mr. Mitchell's age and condition, we believe shifting to comfort measures would be appropriate at this point. Dr. West concluded. Of course, as his medical proxy. The final decision rests with you. Mrs. Mitchell. Eleanor listened calmly, her hands folded in her lap to hide their trembling. I understand your assessment, doctor, but I'm requesting a 24-hour extension of full treatment. Dr. West frowned. Mrs. Mitchell. Prolonging aggressive measures when the prognosis is this poor. One day. Eleanor interrupted. I'm not ready to give up on my husband yet. The administrator, a middle-aged woman with sympathetic eyes, intervened. Perhaps we could compromise. Continue current treatment levels for 24 hours, then reassess. Dr. West looked displeased but nodded curtly. Very well, but I want to be clear that I don't expect significant improvement in that time frame. Thank you, Eleanor said, rising from her chair with dignity. Now, if you'll excuse me, I need some time with my husband. The next few hours passed in a flurry of discreet activity. Sarah, officially off duty but lingering at the hospital, served as Eleanor's primary ally, coordinating between various sympathetic staff members. Nancy ensured that Frank's care remained uninterrupted while creating a window of opportunity during shift change. Dr. Chen, after hearing Eleanor's plea, agreed to be present purely to monitor Mr. Mitchell's neurological responses. At 3:15 p.m., Dr. Winters arrived at a little-used service entrance with Duke in a special transport carrier. The German shepherd had been bathed again, his heart monitored throughout the morning, and given medication to stabilize his condition, though still not at full strength. Duke's eyes were alert and his demeanor calm as Dr. Winters led him through the back corridors of Portland Memorial. His heart rate stable, she reported quietly to Eleanor, who met them near the service elevator. But we should keep this visit brief. No more than 10 minutes. Eleanor nodded, kneeling to stroke Duke's noble head. You ready to see Frank again? Boy. Duke's ears perked forward at Frank's name, his posture straightening despite his fatigue. Dr. Winters smiled sadly. I swear he understands every word. Frank always said the same thing, Eleanor replied. The timing had been carefully orchestrated. Dr. West was in a department meeting, his attention diverted by a presentation on new stroke protocols. The ICU charge nurse, a friend of Nancy's, sympathetic to their cause, had arranged for Frank to be moved to the room farthest from the nursing station, with monitoring equipment adjusted to alert staff via silent pagers, rather than audible alarms. Dr. Chen met them outside Frank's room, her expression a mixture of professional concern and human compassion. Mrs. Mitchell, I want to be clear I'm here to monitor Frank's neurological responses. If this intervention creates any distress, we'll need to end it immediately. I understand, Eleanor agreed. Thank you for doing this. Inside, Frank lay as she had left him, his condition seemingly unchanged, fever still high, breathing labored, unresponsive to verbal stimuli. Duke paused at the threshold, perhaps remembering his previous visit, before padding softly to Frank's bedside with careful dignity. His heart rate slightly elevated, but within safe parameters. Dr. Winters reported quietly, monitoring Duke with professional attention. Dr. Chen watched the medical equipment tracking Frank's vital signs. No adverse reactions so far. Eleanor moved to Frank's side opposite Duke, taking her husband's hand. Frank, she said clearly, Duke's here again. He came from the vet's just to see you. Duke raised himself slightly, resting his muzzle on the edge of the bed near Frank's arm. The shepherd's eyes fixed on Frank's face with the same intense focus he had shown during their first visit. Then, with infinite gentleness, Duke nudged his nose under Frank's limp hand. For a long moment, nothing happened. Eleanor felt hope wavering, replaced by the cold certainty that she had risked too much for a miracle that wouldn't come. Then Duke made a soft sound, not quite a whine, more a gentle vocalization that seemed to carry meaning beyond human understanding. Frank's fingers twitched. Response. Doctor, Chen murmured, moving closer to observe. Definite tactile response. Duke made the sound again, pressing his muzzle more firmly against Frank's hand. This time, Frank's fingers curled slightly, as if trying to grasp the familiar fur. Frank. Eleanor leaned closer. Sweetheart, we're here. Duke and I are both here. Frank's eyelids fluttered, then opened halfway. His gaze wandered unfocused for a moment before settling on Duke. Recognition dawned slowly but unmistakably in his eyes. That's right, Eleanor encouraged. Duke came to see you again. He's been sick too, but he's getting better. Just like you need to. Something shifted in Frank's expression, a subtle change that might have been missed by anyone who hadn't shared 48 years of marriage with him. Eleanor recognized it immediately, Frank Mitchell's stubborn determination, the same unyielding will that had helped him survive a brutal tour in Vietnam, 35 years on the police force, and the devastating loss of their son. Duke seemed to sense it too, The shepherd's tail moved in a single deliberate wag, his posture becoming more alert despite his own fatigue. Dr. Chen was watching the monitors with growing interest. His oxygen saturation is improving slightly, heart rate stabilizing. She glanced at Eleanor. Keep talking to him, both of you. Eleanor nodded, squeezing Frank's hand. Remember when you brought Duke home? Frank, that rainy night when you showed up with this half-dead puppy, I thought you'd lost your mind. She smiled through gathering tears. But you said, this dog's gonna save my life someday. Ellie, you always did have good instincts. Duke maintained his position, occasionally making soft sounds that seemed to keep Frank's attention focused. For his part, Frank kept his hand in Duke's fur, his eyes drifting closed occasionally but always opening again to find the shepherd still there. Dr. Winters checked her watch reluctantly. Eleanor, Duke's heart rate is elevating. We should wrap this up soon. Just one more minute, Eleanor pleaded. In that final minute, something extraordinary happened. Frank's lips moved, forming words without sound. Eleanor leaned closer. What is it, sweetheart? Frank's voice emerged as barely a whisper, raspy from disuse in the breathing tube that had been removed only yesterday. Good dog. Duke's ears perked forward, his tail wagging once, twice, with restrained joy. Frank's hand tightened fractionally in the shepherd's fur as he added with visible effort, My good dog. Dr. Chen was making rapid notes, her professional demeanor barely containing her excitement. This level of verbal response is significant, far beyond what we were expecting at this stage. As they prepared to end the visit, Duke made a final gesture of profound tenderness. The shepherd carefully raised himself just enough to place his muzzle against Frank's cheek for a brief moment, a canine kiss of such gentle affection that even Dr. Winters, accustomed to the bonds between humans and animals, turned away to hide sudden emotion. We'll be back tomorrow, Eleanor promised Frank. Though uncertainty clouded the words, given Duke's condition and the hospital's policies, she couldn't know if another visit would be possible. Frank seemed to understand the uncertainty. His eyes, clearer now than they had been all week, moved from Duke to Eleanor. With tremendous effort, he formed 3 more words, love, you, both. As they led Duke from the room, Eleanor glanced back to see Frank watching them go, awareness and determination visible in his gaze for the first time since his stroke. Whatever happened next, she had given him this moment, had given them both this chance to connect once more. In the hallway, they nearly collided with Dr. West, returning from his meeting with a dark expression that suggested he'd been informed of their unauthorized visit. Dr. Chen, he began coldly, I expressly countermanded. You need to see this. Dr. Chen interrupted, handing him Frank's chart with the latest readings. Mr. Mitchell is showing significant neurological improvement, verbal responses, improved oxygenation, consistent hand movement. Dr. West scanned the data, his frown deepening. This doesn't change the underlying condition. The pneumonia is responding. Dr. Chen insisted. Look at the latest blood work. The inflammatory markers are down. His fever has dropped 0.5 degree in just the last hour. For a moment, professional rivalry seemed to war with medical ethics on Dr. West's face. Finally, He looked from the chart to Duke, who stood quietly beside Dr. Winters, dignity intact despite his obvious fatigue. "This is highly irregular," he said finally, "but I cannot ignore documented improvement. Whatever its cause," he addressed Eleanor directly. "You have your 24 hours, Mrs. Mitchell. Let's see if this intervention produces lasting results." As Dr. West strode away, Eleanor exchanged glances with Dr. Chen, who allowed herself a small smile of triumph. "Take Duke back to the clinic now," Dr. Winters advised gently. "He needs rest and monitoring." "But Eleanor—" She hesitated, then added with professional caution, tempered by genuine wonder, "I've been a veterinarian for 20 years. I've seen remarkable connections between humans and animals. But what Duke just did for Frank, what they just did for each other, that's something beyond medicine." Eleanor nodded, kneeling to embrace Duke one last time before he left. "Frank always said Duke understood him better than most people ever could." She stroked the shepherd's graying muzzle, noticing how the effort of the visit had taxed his strength. "Rest now, brave heart. You've done enough." As Dr. Winters led Duke away, Eleanor returned to Frank's side. Hope rekindled where despair had nearly taken root. Whatever science might say about coincidence or correlation, Eleanor Mitchell knew what she had witnessed: two hearts, human and canine, calling each other back from the brink through a bond that transcended ordinary understanding. The next 3 weeks unfolded like a slow-motion miracle at Portland Memorial Hospital. Frank Mitchell's recovery defied medical expectations daily, his progress charted in incremental victories that accumulated into what Dr. Chen carefully termed a remarkable case study in neurological resilience. His fever broke completely 48 hours after Duke's second visit. The pneumonia responded to antibiotics with unexpected vigor. Most significantly, his neurological functions began returning speech, halting but improving, right side mobility gradually strengthening, cognitive awareness sharpening with each passing day. Dr. West, to his credit, acknowledged the improvement with professional grace. "While I maintain that Mr. Mitchell's recovery cannot be scientifically attributed to canine interaction," he noted in the medical record, "the patient's trajectory has been unusually positive following these visits." This clinical understatement masked what the nursing staff called the Duke effect, a profound change in Frank's demeanor and engagement following each carefully orchestrated visit from his German shepherd. After the dramatic second encounter, hospital administration had reluctantly approved a modified visitation schedule, allowing Duke brief, supervised access to Frank's room 3 times weekly. Duke's own health stabilized under Dr. Winters' care. The shepherd spent 3 days at the veterinary clinic before returning to Eleanor's care with a regimen of heart medication and activity restrictions. Though the heart condition would require lifelong management, his prognosis was good with proper treatment, another small miracle in a season that suddenly seemed full of them. "He's responding well to the medication," Dr. Winters reported during a follow-up examination, "and frankly, I think knowing he can see Frank regularly has reduced his stress levels considerably." Eleanor understood this perfectly. Her own health had improved since the crisis point 3 weeks prior, the crushing anxiety giving way to cautious hope, and then to genuine optimism, as Frank continued his steady progress. By the beginning of the 3rd week, Frank had advanced from ICU to a standard neurological recovery room, where physical therapy became the focus of his days. His speech, though still affected by the stroke, had improved enough for short conversations. His first complete sentence, "When can I go home?" had brought tears to Eleanor's eyes. Soon, she had promised, holding his hand, the same hand that had rescued a broken puppy 8 years before, now working diligently with therapists to regain its former strength. "Duke's waiting for you." The hospital staff, initially divided over Duke's visits, had largely converted to believers after witnessing Frank's extraordinary motivation during therapy sessions that coincided with the shepherd's appearances. Physical therapist Melissa Corning noted in her assessment, "Patient demonstrates 60% greater effort and duration when therapy sessions include canine companion, recommend continued integration of animal-assisted therapy into recovery protocol." Even Dr. West had softened his stance, particularly after a national medical journal expressed interest in the case as a potential study in alternative therapy approaches for stroke recovery. Professional recognition had a way of transforming skepticism into scientific curiosity. "We should document this more thoroughly," he suggested to Eleanor during rounds one morning. "The correlation between Mr. Mitchell's recovery and the dog's presence may have implications for future treatment protocols." Eleanor smiled, remembering Frank's words from years ago when hospital administrators had questioned his therapy choices for traumatized victims. Sometimes helping people heal means letting go of the rule book. On a bright Tuesday morning, 3 weeks after Frank's stroke, Dr. Chen signed the discharge papers that would allow him to return home. Frank sat on the edge of his hospital bed, dressed in his own clothes for the first time since admission, his expression a mixture of triumph and exhaustion. "Remember, this is just the beginning of recovery," Dr. Chen cautioned as she reviewed the extensive follow-up instructions. "You'll need outpatient therapy 3 times weekly, continued medication, and regular checkups." Frank nodded, his right hand still slightly weaker than his left, but improving daily. "Got it. Doc, just want to sleep in my own bed. With a certain furry companion, I imagine?" Dr. Chen smiled. In the 3 weeks since the crisis, she had become one of Duke's most vocal advocates within the hospital, even initiating discussions about a formal animal therapy program inspired by his example. "Duke's probably wearing a hole in the carpet waiting," Frank agreed, his speech clear despite a slight slurring on certain consonants. Eleanor, packing the last of Frank's personal items, caught Dr. Chen's eye with silent gratitude. Without the young neurologist's willingness to challenge convention, this moment might never have come. The discharge process was anything but routine. News of the Miracle of Portland Memorial, as one enthusiastic nurse had dubbed it, had spread throughout the hospital. Staff members found excuses to pass by Frank's room, offering good wishes and sharing stories of Duke's steadfast vigil during those critical early days. Sarah Donovan arrived during her break, still in her EMT uniform. "Just wanted to see you off properly," she told Frank, who grasped her hand with genuine emotion. "Eleanor told me what you did following Duke into the woods." Frank's voice roughened. "I wouldn't be here without you trusting that dog." Sarah shook her head. "I just followed Duke's lead. He knew exactly what to do." Nurse Nancy Thompson appeared with a wheelchair for the traditional exit, though protocol hardly seemed necessary given the small crowd gathering in the hallway. "Your chariot awaits, Mr. Mitchell." As Frank settled into the wheelchair, Dr. West appeared, his usual brisk manner tempered by what might have been professional curiosity or perhaps something more human. "Mr. Mitchell," he acknowledged with a nod. "Your recovery has been instructive." Frank regarded the doctor who had nearly given up on him with remarkable grace. "Appreciate everything you did, Doc, even when you thought it was hopeless." Something shifted in Dr. West's expression, a brief glimpse of the physician beneath the professional armor. "Medicine is a science, Mr. Mitchell, but healing sometimes follows paths we don't fully understand." He extended his hand. "I wish you continued recovery." The farewell procession through Portland Memorial's corridors took on a celebratory atmosphere, with staff members emerging from various departments to witness Frank's departure. Eleanor walked beside the wheelchair, occasionally squeezing Frank's shoulder when emotion threatened to overwhelm him. "Quite the send-off," Frank murmured as they approached the main entrance where a hospital administrator waited with a photographer from the Oregonian. The human interest story of the loyal German Shepherd and his recovering owner had captured public imagination, becoming something of a local legend. "Duke deserves the credit," Eleanor replied. "He's the one who brought you back to me." Frank's eyes misted slightly. "Always said that dog was smarter than most people I know." Outside, spring sunshine bathed the hospital entrance in golden light. A small group had gathered near Eleanor's car, which was parked in a reserved space close to the door. Among them stood Dr. Winters, holding Duke's leash with a broad smile, the German Shepherd, who had been sitting with perfect composure, rose immediately when the automatic doors slid open. His ears perked forward, his mismatched eyes fixed on the wheelchair with laser focus. Dr. Winters released the leash, allowing Duke to approach at his own pace. Frank leaned forward in the wheelchair, right arm extending slightly, the arm he had worked tirelessly to strengthen in physical therapy. Motivated by this precise moment. "Come here, boy." Duke moved with measured dignity across the pavement, his limp barely noticeable, his bearing regal, despite the medication patches visible on his recently shaved chest. When he reached Frank, the shepherd paused, surveying his master with intelligent assessment before gently placing his muzzle on Frank's knee. "Hey, partner," Frank said softly, his voice thick with emotion as he rested his hand on Duke's head. "Heard you've been raising quite a ruckus on my account." Duke pressed closer, his tail sweeping in a slow, deliberate arc as Frank's fingers found the familiar spot behind his ears. For a long moment, man and dog remained in silent communion, their reunion witnessed by medical professionals who had front-row seats to what many now acknowledged was an extraordinary bond. The Oregonian photographer captured the moment, an image that would later appear on the front page, captioned simply, "Faithful friends, the shepherd who wouldn't give up." With Eleanor's assistance, Frank rose from the wheelchair for the final steps to their car. Hospital policy required the wheelchair exit, but Frank had insisted on walking to the vehicle himself, another small victory in a recovery journey filled with them. Duke moved precisely at his side, perfectly positioned to brace Frank if needed, though the older man managed the short distance with determined independence. As they prepared to leave, Sarah approached one last time. "I've been thinking," she said hesitantly, "about what happened with Duke. I've applied to volunteer with the service dog training program at Veterans Hospital. Thought maybe I could help other partnerships like yours." Frank smiled broadly, the expression transforming his still gaunt face. "Good call. World needs more people who understand what these animals can do. He glanced down at Duke. What they know, that we don't. The drive home to Westridge Lane took exactly 17 minutes. The same 17 minutes that had stretched into eternity 3 weeks earlier when Eleanor had raced to the hospital, uncertain if Frank would survive the day. Now, with Frank in the passenger seat and Duke watching attentively from the back, those same 17 minutes felt like a journey home in every sense of the word. Their modest craftsman house looked exactly as they had left it, though neighbors had maintained the yard and filled the refrigerator with home-cooked meals. Mrs. Abernathy from next door had even placed a welcome home banner across the front porch, its cheerful letters fluttering in the spring breeze. Frank paused at the base of the porch steps, looking up at the 3 shallow stairs with the measured calculation of a man newly aware of his physical limitations. Duke positioned himself automatically at Frank's weaker right side, providing subtle support without compromising his master's dignity. "We can take it slow," Eleanor said, reaching for Frank's arm. Frank shook his head, a familiar stubborn set to his jaw. "Duke and I got this." "Right, boy." 1 step at a time, man and dog ascended together, each movement deliberate but determined. At the top, Frank paused, breathing heavily from the exertion but smiling with quiet triumph. "Home," he said simply, looking from Eleanor to Duke. "We made it home." Later that evening, as sunset painted the living room in amber hues, the 3 settled into what would become their new routine. Frank in his recliner, medication arranged neatly on the side table. Eleanor in her reading chair, medical instructions and therapy schedules organized in a binder. Duke on his orthopedic bed beside Frank's chair, heart medication hidden in a treat Eleanor had prepared earlier. Frank's gnarled hand rested on Duke's head, fingers moving gently through the shepherd's fur in a rhythm as natural as breathing. "You know," he said quietly, "when I was after the stroke, I could hear him." Eleanor looked up from her reading. "Duke." Frank nodded, his expression distant. "Not barking or anything, just present, like he was calling me back." He met Eleanor's gaze. "Sounds crazy, I guess." "No," she said softly. "Not crazy at all." Duke shifted position slightly, pressing his head more firmly against Frank's hand as if in confirmation. The shepherd's eyes, one blue and one amber, reflected a wisdom and understanding that transcended ordinary animal intelligence. "Doc says I've got months of therapy ahead," Frank continued. "May never be quite the same." "We'll manage," Eleanor assured him. "All 3 of us." Frank looked down at Duke, whose steadfast loyalty had altered the course of all their lives. "You hear that? Duke, we've still got work to do." The shepherd's tail thumped once against his bed, a deliberate, measured response that needed no translation. Whatever challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, the retired detective whose stubbornness had survived a devastating stroke, the former nurse whose faith had never wavered, and the scarred German shepherd who had proven that sometimes the deepest bonds of loyalty and love could accomplish what medicine alone could not. As darkness fell over Portland, Duke maintained his vigilant watch, guarding his humans with the same unwavering devotion that had led him through rain and forest, through hospital corridors and medical crises, a silent sentinel whose extraordinary heart despite its physical imperfections, embodied the purest definition of faithfulness. In the quiet of their home, 3 survivors rested together, each bearing scars both visible and hidden, each strengthened by a connection that had been tested in fire and emerged unbroken. Outside, rain began again, pattering gently against the windows, not the threatening deluge of 3 weeks past, but a soft spring shower promising renewal and growth in the season ahead. In a world that often rushes past the wisdom of our years, Duke's story reminds us what we've always known in our hearts, that loyalty transcends words, that love defies medical textbooks, and that sometimes the most profound healing comes through bonds we've nurtured over decades. When Frank Mitchell faced the darkness after his stroke, it wasn't modern medicine alone that pulled him back. It was the unwavering devotion of a